Well, hello there, and welcome to the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live series. My name is Guy Stevens. I'm the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. I am also, for the next hour and however long we go, the host here of the podcast as well. And I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us here today. Today is actually Thursday, June 18th, and we've got a great show in store for you today. I've got a fantastic speaker, Rebecca Engle, who's going to be sharing some great things with us and talking a bit about PBIS and behaviorism and better things that we can do to support children. So that's going to be a lot of fun. If this is your first time here, you're not familiar with who we are, the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint is a small national nonprofit. In fact, we work even internationally sometimes, but we are a small nonprofit focused on really moving away from punitive and exclusionary discipline, outdated behavior management approaches, trying to curb the school to prison pipeline. We do a lot of work in the spaces of legislation, education, and individual support. And we're really here to be an organization to try to improve outcomes, not only for children, but also in our schools for teachers and staff and families and communities as well. Before we get into our show today, a couple of announcements to share with you. First, I want to share with you a little bit of information about a sponsor that we have here for the podcast. And we've got a sponsor that's actually been supporting us for the podcast throughout this year, which is Bowman Consulting Group. And Doris and Rick Bowman, if you're familiar with who they are, they've written a couple of fantastic books recently. In fact, one that came out, I guess, last fall and one that came out earlier this year. The book that came out last fall was called Your FBA is a Fantasy. And it really goes into the problem with many functional behavioral assessments. You know, I often speak about this, but very often these assessments that are done are not working. They're not supporting kids that really need help, and they're lacking. You know, many of these assessments are not trauma-informed. They're not aligned with what we know about neuroscience. And the Bowmans put together kind of a really great resource in helping people to align understanding behavior through that lens of trauma and understanding it through the lens of neuroscience as well. They put out another book a few months later called Facing the Fantasy. If you're someone who would benefit from learning about trauma-informed approaches and neuroscience, but don't necessarily write FBAs or not involved in behavior plans, Facing the Fantasy can be a great book for you. They actually have on this special website, and we'll put a link to it in the chat as well, which probably Courtney may already have done. But on this special website that they have set up for us, you can actually order the books, and there's a discount code, and it says it's expired, but I'm going to reach out to Doris to make sure we can extend this. But you can get a 40% discount on Your FBA is a Fantasy. They were also doing a 25% discount on Facing the Fantasy. They do a lot of other support services as well, a lot of speaking and events, and I would encourage you to check out the special website that they set up for our podcast listeners. It'll tell you about the Bowmans, about Rick and Doris, and a lot of the work that they're doing to try to improve outcomes for children and teachers and staff, very aligned with the work that we do here as well. So I want to thank the Bowmans for being a sponsor for our podcast and encourage you to check out their work. One other quick announcement while we're here, really want to encourage you to support the work that we do here at the Alliance as well. And as a small nonprofit, we really require funding and support to be able to do the things that we're trying to do. So if you are able to support us in any way, you can come here to our website, which is endseclusion.org. You can make a one-time donation if you'd like to. One of the other things that we offer now is we have an option to join the Alliance. And if you join the Alliance, you can actually join as a monthly contributor. And it starts at just $5 a month. There's plans for $25 and more. But when you're making a consistent contribution, it really helps us to be able to do the work that we're doing. And if you come here to the website, you can learn more about what it means to be a supporter, what are the benefits at various levels as well, because there are different benefits depending on the level that you are supporting us at. And again, this work does not happen without support. So just want to encourage you, if you are able, to consider supporting the work that we're doing here as well. So with that, let's get to why we are really here today. And I'm going to bring up on the stage with me Rebecca Engle. And let me tell you a little bit about Rebecca. Rebecca Engle is an autistic educator, author, and speaker based in Texas. Although if you're paying attention, you'll find that Rebecca is all over the place lately, doing speaking events and doing lots of amazing things. She is the founder of Stitches and Stanzas, where she blends creativity, advocacy, and education to support neurodivergent individuals and the people who teach and love them. Rebecca is an international best-selling author of 4 books inspired by her own experiences navigating school as an autistic student. In fact, we had you on here before to talk about one of your books as well. And of course, we've had an opportunity to do a book study on one of the other books that you've worked on, and you've got some fantastic work. You are also a special education teacher and speaker, and you're known really for challenging things that aren't working, and that's really important. We often find ourselves in situations where you're hearing people say, well, these things aren't working, and very often they continue to do the things that aren't working. But you are known for challenging traditional behavior systems, advocating for regulation first, neurodiversity-affirming practices, very much aligned with the work that we do here at the Alliance. You presented at conferences across the country and serve on the Autism Community Network of Experts by Experience Board. Your work centers on helping others understand the nervous system, rethink compliance-based models. And as you probably know, Rebecca, my least favorite word is compliance. I'm not a fan of compliance or compliance-based approaches. And you really work to build spaces where all learners can truly belong. And what I love so much about the work that you do is it's really informed by your journey. Not only, first as an autistic student, going through a system where you often found yourself, not well supported with low expectations, and emerging from that system, wanting to become an educator and having the challenges that you face going through all of that. But now, you're a disruptor, and I mean that in a good way, as in you're really bringing to attention a lot of the things that aren't working and really promoting better ideas and better approaches. So, Rebecca, it's great to have you here. And I guess one thing I left off of your bio is you are also a volunteer here at the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, and have been now for a couple of years. It's been really fantastic for me, first to get to meet you in the first place, but even just watching your journey over the last few years as you've, kind of finished your education and moved into teaching positions, and then, becoming a speaker that's all over talking about these really important things. So, Becca, it's great to have you here, and thanks for making some time today.
Yeah, I'm honored to be here, and I can't wait to get into it. And I'll do a brief introduction of myself too in my slides.
Fantastic. So you have a presentation for us today, and really what that means is I'm going to bring up your deck here in a moment, and when I do, I'm going to give you front and center. I'm going to disappear off into the background, but I will be here. So if you need anything, you can call out to me. But I'll let you kind of take it over. And I want to let people know, if you're watching live, and I see a couple people have already jumped in and said hello. But if you are here and you're watching live, let us know in the chat who you are and where you're from. It's always, I think, really fun to see where people are joining us from. Becca, but we have people from all over the world that jump on these podcasts, and, people from Australia, New Zealand, the UK, kind of all over. And it's always fun to see where people are joining us from. A couple have already joined in here. Alex joining in, and if that's the Alex I think it is, from Canada. We have Sarah Ann here as well, also in Canada. And we've got a lot of Canadians here today. Pam, thrilled to be here from the beautiful west coast of Canada. And we're excited to have you here as well. We've got Michael here. Go, Becca. So you've got some fans here, as I'm sure. And we've got Andy here as well from Minnesota. So again, if you're watching, let us know in the chat who you are and where you're from. And Becca, what I'm going to do, I'm going to right now go ahead and bring up your presentation. And when you're ready, you can go into the full presentation mode and kind of take it away. So let me hand it over to you. I will disappear off into the background. And as you wrap up, I'll come back, and I might have some questions. But others, if you're watching live, we'll take questions at the end. But feel free at any point to put a question in the chat. So we'll keep an eye on that. And if you ask a question kind of as it comes to your mind, we want to make sure that you don't lose that. So feel free anytime to put a question or comment in the chat, and we will try to get to those. A couple more hellos here. Rebecca Ann and Alex there on Facebook. Great to see you, Alex. So take it away, Becca. I'm gonna disappear. I'm really excited to have you here presenting today.
Awesome. Thank you. So everyone, thank you for being here. Today I'm going to challenge one of the biggest assumptions in education, and that is that that behavior is something we control. I believe behavior is something we understand. For decades, we've invested in these systems designed solely to increase compliance. Yet anxiety is rising. We see burnout is rising, exclusion is rising, and many students still don't feel like they belong. So today we're going to explore behavior through the lens of neuroscience, regulation, and belonging. Who am I? So before I talk about students, I want to tell you about myself. I was the child in special education. I was non-speaking. I was the students adults worried about. I am also now a special education teacher, author, advocate, and speaker. As Guy shared, I've experienced education from both sides of the table. Everything I'm sharing today comes from both lived experience and educational research. So this topic matters. I've spent years watching schools invest enormous amounts of time into behavior systems, yet many students remain dysregulated. This made me start asking a question. What if the problem isn't the child? What if the problem is the lens we're using to understand behavior? And real fast, this side of this presentation, I am going about half of what I would typically do in a normal audience on stage. I do offer private brains, behavior, and belonging coursework where you can reach out to me for. The link is out of date. And of course, the May 27th has passed. But if you're interested in attending a brains, behavior, and belonging session, we can talk about that. And then the spinal cord and the nervous system. This is briefly very simplified version of what happens in your body past your brain. Again, super, super simplified. There's a lot more science to it and a lot more to it. But when you're trying to cram everything into a flyer, you keep it pretty simple. And so as you can see, motor coordination, your emotions and self-regulation skills, your understanding and problem solving, your memory and processing, your attention and focus, your overall well-being all comes from your spine as well as your brain. And if your spine isn't there, the rest of your system is not going to be fully connected. Behavior is a signal of need. Oftentimes in education, we hear things like character flaw, manipulation, defiance, aggression, communication. We use communication, and I want you to start thinking RCC, regulate, connect, collaborate. Behavior is a communication style explanation. If you just look at behavior as communication, you're saying he threw the pencil to escape math. If you move away from it's simply being communication, and you're looking at neurodiversity-affirming explanations, and you want to find the answer as a signal of need, and you're looking at the root cause of a behavior. He was overwhelmed and didn't know how to ask for help. Throwing the pencil was his stress signal. As you can see, I've now moved away from a model of this student did bad thing to this student had a reaction to something going on within his body. And when we have that, we've now addressed emotion, environment, trauma and safety, and student voice. And PBIS often asks, how do I stop this behavior? I ask, what is this behavior communicating? And if you look at my form, of course, if we simply keep it at behaviors communication, we have this very simple need. And if we change it to what is this behavior signaling, we have a very long, detailed explanation that is also short and sweet, but a little bit more detailed in the communication style. That answer changes everything. Your common triggers for behavior are the restriction of movement, powerlessness, confrontation, there's rejection and isolation, maybe ambiguity and unpredictability, overstimulation, understimulation, or maybe nutrition. I want to talk a little bit about why these behaviors happen. But here's my challenge. How many school behavior systems accidentally create these exact conditions? Many students are responding to the environment that their nervous system experiences as stressful. It's not an excuse necessarily as much as it is an explanation. Let's look at what we're feeding our kids. You know, are our kids eating? I know the school cafeteria food when I was growing up was absolutely disgusting. Like, I would have rather starved myself than ate what was being served to me at the school cafeteria. And thankfully, I was privileged enough to, get food from home, but not every kid is. Understimulation and overstimulation, right? Are we stimulating the mind enough? Are we stimulating their system enough? We have ambiguity and unpredictability, right? The schedule changes. Now it's an early release day. Maybe now there's a presentation downstairs that wasn't supposed to happen. Someone's in town to do an author visit. We see all these changes throughout the schedule. The teacher's sick and now we have a sub. There's confrontation maybe. We have aggression, a conflict of interest. Maybe the teacher decided that they wanted to do math first instead of reading, and that triggered the student. Powerlessness. We have complete control of our classroom as educators, and right now, and kids are not able to advocate for what they need. And as we've seen an increase in universal design for learning, we're seeing that change, and we're seeing that shared power dynamic. But then almost when teachers finally let go a little bit and offer these choices, it's almost like they still need something to restrict. And so we're saying, you get to choose between these 5 things. And if you choose between these 5 things, you are rewarded with XYZ, rather than letting the student maybe suggest that 6th option that you probably didn't even think of. Restriction of movement. I've talked to architects before about how we build and design schools. And one of the important things we look for in that is, how the child can stand up and navigate the environment in which they're in. Do they know where the door is? Do they know where all the precautions are for their safety? And do they know that they can elope to a safe place if necessary? And yes, eloping is sometimes okay as long as it is to a safe place. Not going to get too far into this because I really do want to get into the PBIS stuff, but I feel like the contextual information here is interesting and important. Stimming is stimulatory behavior, which involves repetitive movements. My common ones as a kid were arm flapping with my arms, kind of like a bird. And I would also do a lot of spinning in circles and rocking back and forward. It looks different for everyone, but one of the most misunderstood behaviors is stimming. Stimming is not inherently a problem. It is regulation. Many autistic students stim because their nervous systems are working to maintain a balance. The goal should not be eliminating regulation strategies. The goal should always be understanding them. Think about adults. We bounce our legs, we twirl our hair, we click our pens, we pace during phone calls. Those are stims. The difference is that autistic stims are often more visible and don't look normal, quote unquote. Visibility should not determine whether something is acceptable. Basic neurological basis here. This is kind of where the neuroscience becomes important. Stimming helps manage sensory input. It helps regulate emotion. It can support attention and focus, especially in that spine, as discussed about in that former slide. Yet many behavior systems attempt to reduce stimming because it looks different. If a behavior supports regulation and it isn't causing harm, why are we trying to eliminate it? There's different types of stimming. I want educators to recognize that stimming comes in many forms: visual, auditory, vestibular, oral. When we understand the functions of a stim, we can support the student rather than suppress the behavior into a cookie. This slide highlights something super important. Many stims support emotional regulation, concentration, and sensory processing. Sometimes the behavior adults are, trying the hardest to stop is the exact behavior helping the students stay available to learn. Subtle stims, serve as ways to regulate that sensory input. Maybe their eyes are expanding. One of my common stims nowadays is that my eyes will dilate. Why I flick my fingers or rub my hands together, or fingers together. There's jaw clenching for emotional regulation, and breath manipulation can be used to regulate emotional stress. But there are also students who, sometimes these behaviors, they may need an alternative or have their own alternative, not that, jaw clenching doesn't work for every autistic person, rubbing hands together doesn't work for every autistic person. Controlled breathing, can provide a calming effect for some, others it doesn't. There's pattern pacing, silent echolalia, aiding in focus and concentration. Often I'll hear teachers get annoyed over a student having echolalia. Maybe they're repeating their favorite TV show quote over and over again. This rhythmic movement of pacing helps organize the student's thoughts, and repeating phrasing sometimes internally reinforces learning. And it may not be the learning you're necessarily doing in class of the phrase that they're repeating, but it may be some other form of learning or communication style. Again, I think I briefly discussed this, but the question shouldn't be, how do we make students look typical? The question should be, how do we create environments where students can be themselves safely? Acceptance is an educational intervention. And of course, I think responding to stimming is an important part about going against PBIS, because oftentimes we use PBIS systems in our K-12 system to control behavior, and that behavior may be a stim. So this is kind of a rundown of what support looks like. Please allow harmless stims, provide that sensory support, and normalize those differences across your classroom. Notice that none of these strategies require rewards, punishment, point systems, or behavior charts. They simply require understanding. Educating his classmates about stimming can reduce stigma, and you don't have to point that kid out. You can stim yourself. I'm going to tap my leg right now, and this is how I'm doing this, guys, because this is what works for me. How do you, regulate your body? Let's teach you ways to regulate your body, right? Introducing these things helps create co-regulation as well, which of course helps with long-term neuroception and development. Masking is something I've had to do a lot. We need to talk about it before we get further into detail. Masking is when autistic students suppress natural behaviors to appear more socially acceptable, or really any form of neurodivergence. Many students learn masking because they have to get around punishment. They have to figure out how they can regulate themselves or get through a day while still winning tokens, candy, tickets, chocolate, or whatever else awards there are to offer. You realize authenticity is punished. In kindergarten, my teacher gave lollipops at the end of the day to every good kid. Well, I was allergic to lollipops, so I wasn't really entertained by them because they would have caused me an allergic reaction. But I was considered the bad kid. I was sent to the principal's office every day. And then I got to first and second grade, and my teachers rammed PBIS into us. I mean, it wasn't just a lollipop now. There was, behavior charts, the public shame system, the whole 9 yards, right? Every month we had a dog tag award ceremony where we get necklaces with a dog tag that said like how we were doing, top reader. And I actually would lie on my reading logs in first and second grade simply so I could get the top reader one, because I didn't know what I was reading at home. I could write whatever I wanted, right? And so a lot of the time, in order to win these awards, I was actually lying to get by. And I'm pretty sure that's one of the first times I've admitted that publicly. But it was 2009, so it's been a few years. But I would lie through these systems in order to make sure that I got that recognition. And I remember getting sick as a kid, and my mom would be like, "No, you have to stay home. You're literally dying," and I'd be like, "No, because I won't get perfect attendance." And then I would end up way sicker. My rule as a kid to my mom was always that I had to have a 102-degree fever or something in order to not go to school. And she would attempt, no, stay home. And I needed that award. And the more awards, the more my self-worth was, right? So masking, it's an invisible survival mechanism. I often say PBIS is exceptionally good at rewarding masking. Again, the student who hides their needs gets those points. The student who suppresses their stims gets praise. The student who appears regulated gets rewarded. But appearing regulated and actually being regulated are two very different things. There's social acceptance as well that comes with it. And there's me in front of a mirror, and the idea here was that my mouth was being covered because I was hiding who I really was. I wasn't communicating who I really was, and that's what I did all the way until my master's degree. I had to pretend to be someone I wasn't. I didn't really talk about my autism, because it got me shamed and made me look different. And I was taught, don't bring it up. It will ruin your career, and all these concepts, and eventually I was just ashamed. I was like, I can't live like this. And so this picture was right before I came out like publicly on social media and kind of announced to everyone I was autistic. So yeah, people knew, but I didn't like make a post about it yet. So supporting students who mask. If we want less masking, we have to create a safer environment, more communication options, less social pressure, more acceptable, and more accessible environments. Inclusion is not throwing a disabled kid in the room and saying you've done your job. Students should not have to perform normativity to access belonging. Alternative methods for communication, environments where students feel safe, integrating co-regulation into your design. A common thing I hear from teachers is, well, I have to use rewards or candy or tokens or tickets because I don't really know how to co-regulate with 30 kids. Like, that would be wonderful if I could, but I don't know how to do that. I can't do that. I'm teaching a lesson. I can't co-regulate with 30 kids or co-regulate with one and ignore the other 29. And like, I get it. It's hard. It's not an easy thing to do. But what you can do is have posters on your wall that foster co-regulation and provide co-regulation strategies. What you can do is make sure your classroom is designed around the central nervous system to make sure that students can travel to where their system is currently performing. I have a 3 zones of space design, which is on my website that was shared earlier in here, that allows you to do that and has all the materials to do that. So if that's something you want to purchase, it's only $3.99, but it really does help with that classroom design. And it is 3 different spaces in your room. One is an independent space. One is a more like get your energy out space. And the other one is kind of a, breathe and relax space. But there are different tools in each area to regulate the whole entire nervous system. And before you say your classroom's not big enough, I work in a 10 by 12 space and it works for me. So you can make it work. Emotional and psychological impacts of masking. This slide is kind of why masking matters. Burnout, anxiety, depression, loss of identity. Many students spend years being rewarded for hiding who they are, and eventually that catches up. A system that rewards masking may look successful on paper while harming students underneath the surface, which is exactly what PBIS does. Self-regulation. When behavior happens, my first question is, what does the student need to regulate? Not what consequences do they need? Not how do I make them comply? Regulation comes before learning. I have another set of slides that I do commonly called regulation before rigor. Because regulation will always come first. If you are not regulated, you will not learn or process anything in front of you. And one common misconception I often see with self-regulation or regulating of students, even co-regulation, is, well, I don't have time to go co-regulate with one kid when I have 30, which is something I said earlier, which I get it. But more than likely, if you have one student that is dysregulated, there's probably 15 that aren't visibly dysregulated or haven't been able to communicate it. So it doesn't hurt to take a break and help regulate that child. Because maybe there's 14 other kids of those 30 that also need to regulate. And when you build regulation into your lesson plan and you build it into your classroom design, you don't necessarily always have to stop. The only person that has to stop is the student. So yeah. Sensory overwhelm and student experience. When students experience sensory overwhelm, they are not choosing to struggle. Their nervous systems are responding to an environmental demand, a reward, a token, right? It doesn't solve sensory overload. A consequence doesn't solve sensory overload. Support does. Sensory overwhelm is a significant challenge for many autistic students. And these percentages kind of highlight the degree in which autistic students report sensory overload. I do really have a focus on autism because that is my specialty. I can't even imagine what it is for kids with like ADHD and all of those other neurodiverse needs if this is how high it is for autistics. Trauma-informed education teaches us that safety and trust has to come first, yet many behavior systems rely on surveillance, compliance, and external control. These approaches often conflict with what we know about trauma. Students learn best when they feel safe, connected, and empowered. Here's some strategies that you can actually work. I love this slide because it kind of notices what's absent, right? There's no clip chart, there's no token economy, no treasure boxes, no class dojo points. Instead, we see regulation tools, breathing, mindfulness, sensory supports. These strategies build internal skills because a goal isn't to create students who behave when adults are watching. My goal is to help students develop the capacity to regulate themselves when adults aren't able to, right? Again, if you have 30 kids, one adult in the room, you can't be there. So how can we make sure that we have these co-regulation strategies designed? Everything we've discussed so far leads us to one conclusion. Behavior is not primarily a discipline issue, it's a nervous system issue. And once we understand that, we have to start asking whether these compliance-based systems like PBIS are solving the right and real problems. And then transitions, I kind of want to get into a little bit. Transitions are particularly challenging for neurodivergent students, which escalate behavior commonly in our school system. If a child does a transition successfully, there is some form of reward token. You'll also see first then systems, right? Like first, if you transition here in this amount of time, you'll get this. If you've designed your classroom with preparation, structure, and support, you can take that away. You do not need to be using that. Providing structure, visual supports, and consistent routines in these classrooms and making sure that that transition has structure and that, there is a similar environment in which that student's stepping into, you're significantly easing this transition. You're fostering a more positive and inclusive learning environment for all students, not just the disabled ones. Again, I think I brought this up, but there's unpredictability. You're switching tasks, right? When I move from worksheet to PE, there's a task switch. There's sensory overload, and throwing in a cookie between, class and PE is not getting rid of the fact that this transition is unpredictable, that there's a switch of task, right? I'm going from bouncing a ball maybe back to math. There's a sensory overload. Transitions often involve sensory overload. One of the common things I love that I always suggest is, the transition from, PE to math is very difficult. Well, if you know that, in PE you bounce a basketball, how can I implement basketball bouncing in math until we have that full transition within the body and mind, right? Maybe when we get there, we're almost still doing the same task. We're going to bounce a basketball like we did in PE in our classroom. All right, every time I bounce that ball, I'm counting to 5, right? All right, now we've done a math activity with this ball. We have a task switching engagement now. So we've dealt with the unpredictability. We've predicted that we're going to move from this room to this one. We've dealt with the sensory overload part by getting finally back into another environment where we've managed that sensory input. But we've paused. We haven't necessarily task switched yet, right? We still have a basketball in our hand, just like we did in PE. We're giving it time and space to deal with the unpredictability, sensory overload. And now that we're in our new environment, we can slowly task switch, maybe from the fact that we were just in PE back into math, by using the tools that we may use in PE for a math assignment or for a math warm-up. And that also, for many teachers, if you're judged on the core standards or the ability to address multiple standards within one lesson, now you've included health lessons with math lessons, maybe with even reading all in one lesson, which helps your scores as a teacher. I know, because that's something I am very strong at. And I do have my weaknesses. I'm not perfect. But multi-engaging lessons with that task switch. And now I haven't had to hold a cookie over their head to be able to switch from the ball to the math. Transition songs are also super good for some kids. Some kids need that overstimulation in the mind. Employing songs to signal upcoming changes, predictability, rhythm, help ease anxiety for some kids. And then safe transition spaces. Does it really hurt to leave through the hallway 5 minutes before everyone else does for those kids that may get overstimulated? No, it doesn't. It's not the end of the world to make sure that that student can transition in a quieter environment, which again, in that case, you can also leave room for that task switching warm up, maybe, while the other students that maybe not have these processing disabilities are walking in the hallway. Please listen to autistic voices and experiences. I always include this side because most people forget that I'm coming in here as a autistic adult. And if an autistic student tells you that they're dysregulated and that they can't focus, listen. If they're telling you that a strategy isn't working for them, please listen. We know what's best for us, just like you know what's best for you. Take the input in, try it out. Who knows? They may not know what's best. You may have an internal idea of what works, but work with their mind, collaborate with them, work together to create that best learning environment. I already talked about this, so I'm going to go ahead and skip that. And then self-advocacy, again, collaboration creates self-advocacy. I'm going to go ahead and kind of go over that because I do want to get into that PBIS. Building genuine relationships versus a compliant system. Empathy, active listening, patience. Allow your students time and space to process and respond. Let them try new things. Listen to the students without judgment. Validate their feelings. And focus on understanding their experience and perspective. Now I'm going to get into the heavy side of this. So traditional reward systems often fail autistic students for several reasons. Lack of motivation stems from misalignment with personal interest, and even sometimes intrinsic drive. And there are lack of motivation, anxiety, sensory overload, and task difficulty. I'm going to see if this works. I've never tried to do a video through public streaming, but we'll see. Can y'all see that? No. All right.
Yeah, we're not able to see it.
Yeah. There's a really good short clip that I love to use from a content creator about why PBIS fails. But if it's not going to load, then oh well. So this system is the psychology basis that PBIS was created off of. And ultimately it starts with the idea of operant conditioning. And so here we have reinforcement and punishment. This theory was developed by B.F. Skinner. It suggests that behavior is influenced by its consequences. So the basic idea is behavior followed by desirable consequences are more likely to happen again, and behaviors followed by undesirable consequences are less likely to happen again. Skinner solely focused on observable behavior rather than thoughts, emotions, or internal experiences. There's four main components here. Positive reinforcement is adding something desirable after a behavior to increase that behavior. So Skittles, chocolate, candy, right? Student raises their hand. Teacher gives praise. Yay, you did a great job, right? Hand raising increases. Everyone starts to raise their hand. Positive means something is added. Reinforcement means the behavior increases. So, and a lot of the time it's an operative stimulus following correct behavior. So food. Negative reinforcement is removing something unpleasant after a behavior to increase that behavior. Student completes work. Teacher stops giving reminders. Work completion increases. Negative means something is removed. Reinforcement means the behavior is increased. So maybe I'm going to slowly slip them from 3 Skittles to 1 Skittle. Because I've seen this enough. And this concept is here, right? This is PBIS. Positive punishment. Add something unpleasant to decrease the behavior. If a student talks out, teacher gives a reprimand. Talking out decreases. Positive, again, means something is added. Punishment means behavior decreases. So in this case, we have negative punishment, which is your typical punishment. It's removing something desirable to decrease a behavior. So AKA when you were grounded and not allowed to go play outside. Did you actually ever learn your lesson from that? Probably not. And then your fine motor skills were probably affected too from not being able to play outside. Another good one is when a teacher takes away a child's safe toy, puts it on a high shelf, and says, you don't get to have this until the end of the day. This is operant conditioning. And then PBIS connects to this because it's heavily influenced by operant conditioning. Class dojo points, token economies, treasure boxes, sticker charts, school stores. These systems generally rely on positive reinforcement, which is over here, by providing rewards for desired behaviors. My criticism, and from all of us who are trauma-informed and neurodiversity-affirming, it's not that operant conditioning never changes behavior. It often does. The question is what's actually being learned from it. A reward system may increase behavior, but it may not build emotional regulation. Well, it does not build emotional regulation. It does not develop a child's self-awareness. It does not address the sensory need that made the child have the behavior to begin with. It does not improve a child's communication skills. It does not foster intrinsic motivation. It also still never does explain why the behavior occurred. For example, a student who earns a sticker for sitting still may learn to sit still, but they may not learn how to recognize overwhelm, how to request movement, how to advocate for their sensory needs, or how to regulate their nervous system. Operant conditioning is effective at behavior change, but not always effective at skill building, regulation, or understanding underlying needs because it does not get the internal issue for the behavior because B.F. Skinner built external needs. And we'll get a little bit more into that. So as you can see, we have an increase in anxiety. We've undermined self-regulation, right? There's this external pressure to earn rewards now. And oftentimes we'll see, breaks used as rewards. And now that we've talked a little bit about regulation, sensory processing, stimming, masking, and behavior as communication, the goal here was to bring up how that all plays a role here, right? If the goal in PBIS is to increase desired behaviors through rewards, reinforcement systems, and structured supports, many schools use these token economies, behavior charts, class dojo points, school stores, treasure boxes, whatever you want to say. And their idea is simple: reward behaviors when we want to see, and those behaviors should increase. The problem is behavior isn't that simple. As you can see here, PBIS is built around observable behavior, just like B.F. Skinner intended it to be. It focuses on what we can see, but nervous systems operate beneath, way below the surface. A student can earn every point available and still be completely overwhelmed. A student can earn every reward and still be anxious. A student can comply perfectly and still not feel safe. When we focus primarily on reinforcement, we risk missing the story underneath the behavior. We see an impaired prefrontal cortex. We have a difficulty with focus and self-regulation. I won all of these rewards, and then, my teachers, especially in high school, would look at me and be like, "You're so good. Why do you keep failing your test? You just won all these rewards, but why do you keep failing your test?" And I would, be like, well, maybe because I'm so focused on getting a 95 that I'm not thinking about anything else, including the question right in front of me. And I didn't have room or time to self-regulate because I was so busy at trying to meet the time limit or whatever to get a grade that I didn't really think about the other abilities. And then increasing anxiety and stress hormones is also very common. And we wonder why we have so many people with hormonal problems. So one of the common things I suggest is looking at root beliefs. So behaviorism versus like Ross Green strategies. The root belief in a trauma-informed strategy is that kids do well if they can, and it doesn't have to be Greens. It could be any trauma-informed strategy working on collaboration. Kids do well if they can. There's a signal of unmet need that we can see. There's a solving problem and building skills to solve the problem. There's collaboration and discussion between the teacher and the student, and the dynamic is fully shared. And a behaviorism model, it's the idea that kids do well if they want to, and it's only what we can visually see with our eyes. There's a target to reduce. We want to reduce the behavior or increase the behavior. We want to reinforce compliance. We want to get them compliant to get them through the day. There's rewards, consequence, and simple data, and it's fully adult controlled. The student has no say. A student can earn every reward and still not feel safe. And that's exactly what happens when we don't have collaboration. And then that's the ABA system. Antecedent, we get a behavior, and then whatever that behavior does, there's a consequence to it, whether it's good or bad, and we go back to the function and motivation of the behavior rather than the internal signal of the nervous system. These are super good visuals, but like factors that affect behavior, there's so much, and then observable factors, there's so little, right? And then you only see so much of your student, and your student only sees so much of you. So this I include because this is actually my nervous system. And I want to include this here, and I always talk about this because I feel like it's so important, right? This is me during different times of the year. but this is what my nervous system looks like when it's regulated versus when it's not. As you can see, my neck gets super stressed first. This was actually during a time that I was in my master's degree finals, and we did have reward systems. I know during my master's, I had reward systems and incentives. We got extra credit based upon how many extra assignments we did. And so as you can see, I'm super, super red in the neck. I'm super, super dysregulated. And as you go on through the system, where I am now done with school, I don't have any stressors. My nervous system, the white, is very, very strong. As you can see, the stress in my neck has almost completely disappeared. And so that's fascinating. The middle is throughout that transition. So that's right after I finished finals, kind of right after school ended. I was prepping for graduation and things like that. There's definitely an imbalance of where I am. I'm trying to figure out where I'm at, right? There's a lot of internal stressors still happening. But yeah, super interesting stuff. So I talked about this briefly already, but PBIS, positive behavior intervention supports, is focused on rewards and consequences and aims to encourage positive behavior through systematic reinforcement. And we've already know the common strategies and the issues. Again, we're missing the underlying reasons for behavior. Also, that's a Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint t-shirt, so you should get one. And the problems with traditional PBIS approaches is the fact that we have this, compliance build and the punitive measures and the lack of individualization, right? And this is kind of where I begin to diverge from those traditional behavior management approaches. The first issue here is compliance. Many PBIS systems unintentionally teach students that success means doing what adults want when adults want it and how adults want it. But compliance is not the same thing as regulation. Compliance is not the same thing as emotional health. Compliance is not the same thing as belonging. The second issue here is, of course, masking, which I talked about briefly. Autistic students quickly learn which behaviors get them rewards and which behaviors receive correction. Many become experts at hiding who they are, suppressing stims, forcing eye contact, ignoring sensory discomfort. You push through distress. And from the outside, it looks successful. You've, tokenized them into performance. The third issue here is that PBIS often addresses symptoms rather than causes. If a student is leaving their seat because they need movement, the problem isn't standing. If a student is covering their ears because the room is overwhelming, the problem isn't refusal. And if a student is shutting down because they are overloaded, the problem isn't noncompliance. The behavior here is information, and information should be investigated and not punished. Again, another slide, compliance focus. We're, forcing this compliance system. There's a masking reinforcement. How much can I hide of myself to get another token or to be good today? And long-term neglect. I already went through that. Again, what's better than PBIS? Looking at your needs-based support, giving each student what they need individually, having autonomy, and then flexible learning. Letting students have control of their day. It's really not that difficult. I commonly ask my kids, I say, do you want to play the game first or do you want to do the lesson first? And at first, every kid at the beginning of the year will say, I want to play the game. I want to play the game. I want to play the game. And I'll let them choose a reading or word game or math game, and we'll do the game. And then we'll move on to our lesson. Again, they have a choice between lessons. And it's always fascinating because as the year moves on, all of my kids start saying, I want to do the lesson first, which is the more difficult thing that tests them. And sometimes it is a test. And then we move on to the game. And it's interesting to see them go from oh my gosh, I'm going to fail, so I want to do the game first so I don't have to think about the lesson, to can we knock out the lesson so we can have more fun. Again, I've allowed that student autonomy. We're now doing flexible learning, and there's needs-based support. I've shifted from that behavior management to that needs-based support approach. I've respected my students' autonomy. And another common one is if I have a student who's completely dysregulated, I don't force them to sit and try to learn first. It's a waste of time. I tell them to go to a part of my room where they feel safe, which I have my room designed within my 3 zones of space. Most of the time, my students choose zone 1 and 2. Zone 3 is independent learning. So most students don't want to be in learning mode at that point. So I tell them, go to a zone that works for your brain. They report to that zone, and then they can hear and see all the fun we're having, and the other students engaged while they're doing whatever strategies are on my wall that they can use. And commonly the student will be like, I'm ready to learn now, and come right back to my table. And these are all students with special needs. I do not work with neurotypical populations. And so it is definitely interesting to see. And then, of course, consent-based social interactions. Not every student wants to tell you why, how, and when. Some students may not want to tell you it right there and then. So allowing that consent-based social interaction is also super important. Again, we need to transform learning and work through intrinsic motivation. You want learning to be from curiosity and interest. Connect those lessons to personal interest. Encourage exploration, encourage experimentation, and problem solving. Allow the mind to be curious. Right now, I'm doing summer tutoring, and one of my kids grabbed a popsicle puzzle where they had to fill out a like there are puzzles or popsicles all around the library, and they had to put the letter that was on each fake popsicle hidden around the library into this thing, and solve a code, right? Like solve a mystery. So like blue popsicle could have been C, the red popsicle was H, but at the end of it created a sentence. And I could have said, no, we need to get through our tutoring first and our lesson and our required stuff, and then we can do this activity. Ultimately, though, all of my kids would have been dysregulated. They would have been thinking about wanting to do that activity, and I would have never got them to sit down. Instead, we knocked out this activity in 5 to 10 minutes. The code was chill out with a good book. And I got to, talk about how chill has multiple meanings, hence the popsicles. I got to kind of dive into sentence formation. We got to identify colors, right? There was so much that went into this little activity that I could use to create interest-based learning. We got to talk about our favorite popsicle. And had I wanted to, I could have even had them write a little thing about their favorite popsicle. But ultimately, it was interest-based learning. And they're going to remember far more from that than me forcing them to sit there for an hour to try to get through this lesson. The positive social connection, opportunities for collaboration should be, of course, controlled by the kids. Not everything should be a group or partner activity, especially if the kids don't want it to be, but fostering that sense of belonging and support throughout the whole room. And then real world application, demonstrating practical relevance of learning by applying skills to real world scenarios. I have a scripted curriculum that I'm required to follow, and I'm not necessarily always supposed to go outside of that curriculum. And so I've had to get really, really creative. And one of the stories in the scripted curriculum is a story about an ant home. And instead of just reading the story about the ant home and moving on, I actually have my students build the ant home, and we go outside and do the ant home. And it's always interesting to see how these students kind of combine science with their dyslexia curriculum. So reimagining classroom support frameworks, having that collaboration, that individualization, that flexibility. As I said, I had to be adaptable. Like in that example yesterday, I could have held cookies over their head for them to come back to the table and do that at the end. But ultimately, I would have had one student who probably complained that they didn't like the cookie. I would have had another who kept asking me about when they get the cookie. And I would have had maybe a third student who forced themselves into compliance and tried to take it off their mind. There's psychological drivers of engagement, choice, mastery, and purpose. Empower individuals with choice and task and learning methods. Allow your students to be core parts of that decision-making process. Let your students track their personal progress and celebrate their own milestones. My students actually, for my room, create their own tracking system. I don't design it for them because I want the students to actually be motivated by their system. And if I create it, I don't believe that they'll be motivated by it. So they track their own progress, especially because some students are really happy with a 40 and other students aren't happy with a 40. So I don't want to force them to be happy about a 40 or force them into that mastery system that I could have created myself. So a lot of that is their control. Purpose and meaning, connecting that learning and work to real world application. Again, taking that text and making it a science experiment. With math, I'm really big on having the students actually draw the math problem out, but like a whole like story. Like, there's a guy and he, went to the store and bought these watermelons, and now we're going to add watermelons. We're actually going to draw these things visually. And sometimes we'll even reword the characters and things in the math problem to make it make more sense. But we're making it purposeful and meaningful. All we have to do really to make the math is make sure that the important words that tell us to add, subtract, divide, whatever, stay the same. And then, of course, the numbers. Everything else, it don't matter what we make it. Rewards do backfire. Personal accounts and research highlight the drawbacks of these reward-based systems. The pressure that is there to earn basic needs, like the break sensory tools, are detrimental. And then, of course, the emotional toll of exclusion from reward-based activities is significant because you will have those kids who just never earn those rewards. Think about how those students feel, the students who do not get rewarded, the students who never get incentivized. And PBIS makes success feel out of reach for kids who can't earn these rewards due to how their brains and bodies works. Adults constantly choose the environment, especially within a school system, while kids do not. Adults can leave toxic workplaces or negotiate a bonus to stay. Children are compelled to attend school. If a reward system is manipulative, unsafe, or unfair, they can't just say, no, I don't want to be a part of this. And that creates a power imbalance and conditional belonging. Adults, often you'll hear PBIS compared to a paycheck, and that's exactly why they're not the same. If I hate my paycheck, or if I feel like the conditions on which I'm earning my paycheck are not fair, I can dip. I can go find a new job. I can say, I don't like that, I'm going to leave. Kids do not have that option. Intrinsic motivation is super important. Foster those autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Natural consequences and reflection. If a student's bending over on a chair, giving them a cookie isn't going to teach them why bending over on a chair doesn't work. Let them fall. Let them feel what that feels like, and they probably will never bend over on a chair again. And let them reflect on it. Collaborate solutions to understanding what's driving the behavior. And then, of course, recognition and genuine relationship-based encouragement, not if-then. This is my neurodiversity-affirming approach. And so definitely take that with you. And then relationships aren't a cure-all. Often times I'll say, well, if you have a good relationship with the child, it doesn't matter what you do with the child. The space you've created is important, the engagement you've created, and then, of course, the struggle with social. They're not a cure-all. Autistic students struggle with social interactions. Many students do in general, and prefer minimal engagement. Some students need more space, then they need constant interaction, and understanding and respecting are essential. Key takeaways I want you to take away from this is behavior is communication of a signal of need. Respond with support, don't punish. Understand that behaviors often signal unmet need or sensory sensitivity. If it's severe enough for punishment, make sure the punishment actually aligns with the student's needs, and then have an individualized approach. Not all autistic students are the same. Make sure not all students are the same either, so make sure you're individualizing those approaches and having those conversations with students when they're wanted, and then listen to autistic voices. And a classroom that supports, is super important. I do have a workplace analogy. I do want everyone to imagine something. Imagine a principal, a boss tells you that the only way to be considered successful is to sit in a hard chair for 8 hours a day. No standing, no movement, no accommodations, no flexibility. You explain to your boss that you work better standing. You explain that your back hurts. You explain that a cushion would help. And your boss or principal responds by saying that wouldn't be fair to everyone else. Most adults would immediately recognize how absurd that sounds. They'd be able to leave the environment and change it. Yet we do this to students every day. We create systems that reward one type of behavior and one type of learner. Then we wonder why students struggle. When a student needs movement, flexibility, sensory support, or a different way of participating, the answer should not be making them earn reward for those supports. The answer should be providing those supports, because support is not a reward. Support is access. People often assume that criticizing behavior systems means lowering expectations. It doesn't. I have super high expectations for my students. I just don't believe those expectations should be built around the compliance system. Instead, I focus on flexibility. Different students need different things. I focus on that individualization. A strategy that works for one student may completely fail another. And I focus on collaboration. Students should have a voice in their supports. Families should have a voice. Educators should have a voice. When we move from control to collaboration, classrooms become safer places for everyone. And then, of course, needs-based support means we stop asking, how do I stop this behavior, and start asking what need is being expressed. Autonomy means students have agency over their own regulation, and flexible learning means acknowledging that brains are different. Some students need movement, some need sensory tools, some need quiet, some need communication alternatives. Your goal should never be making all students look the same or feel the same. The goal is create environments where every student can succeed and feel themselves, because belonging does not come from compliance. Belonging comes from being understood. I guess last but not least, I want to leave you with one final thought. For years, education has asked, how do we get students to behave? I think we've been asking the wrong question. The better question is what does the student need? Because behavior is a signal of need. Behavior is information. It is a signal from the nervous system. And when we stop viewing kids and students as problems to be fixed and start viewing them as humans to be understood, everything changes. The goal should have never been compliance. It should always be belonging. And students who feel safe, understood, connected, and supported don't need to be controlled. They need us to understand them. Students do not need reward systems. They need adults who understand brains, behavior, and belonging. So hopefully I addressed all of you today. So that would be it from me.
All right, Becca. Well, you've covered a lot of ground today, and I really appreciate you sharing this presentation with us. We've got a few more minutes left, and if anybody in the chat has any questions or comments, feel free to put those in the chat. I've got a couple that I've been lining up in my head as you've been sharing all of this as well. I guess my first question for you, and I think you addressed this certainly a bit in the presentation, but I just want to kind of bring this point home again. You shared a little bit about your own experience and the lack of support, and unfortunately, this approach, grounded in compliance-based approaches and things like PBS, have been going on for quite some time. Kind of reflecting on your own experience as a student who often was not really seen or understood through the right lens, and there was a lot of like the rewards, and you kind of hit on how like with perfect attendance and some of these, but as you reflect on it now, kind of a few years out from school and the whole experience, what are some of the greatest harms that you think you experienced as a child going through a system that was just so heavily focused on compliance?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm trying to figure out where to begin with that. I think one of the greatest harms was that I learned how to look okay instead of actually be okay, right? Like being rewarded for compliance, I was rewarded for sitting quietly, following directions, right? Masking my struggles and not and making adults comfortable. But from the outside, that looked like success. I was, successful. But internally, I wasn't necessarily learning how to understand my own needs and advocate for myself or recognize when I was overwhelmed. And that system taught me that being a good student meant ignoring my body and my nervous system. Right. And if I was overwhelmed by noise, I was expected to just push through it. If I was confused, I was expected to just hide it or ask questions. But I didn't know how to ask those questions.
Yeah. And I think, that point is so powerful because, kind of becoming conditioned, and let's just use the language here, to ignore your own internal feelings and sensations really puts people in a very dangerous position. It makes people more vulnerable to abuse and not listening to the things that your body is telling you in the moments that they're telling you. I think, really can lead to a lot of harm. I think about some of the events we did in the past, and you probably remember when we did the Beyond Behaviorism event, and we had a lived experience panel, and people were talking about how the use of food led to things like eating disorders. So, the harm is real. The intent, the intent of, positive behavior interventions and support sounds great, right? We want to use positive things, but the intent doesn't change the impact. And I think it's time for people to understand really the impact that these things can have, on neurodivergent learners, on autistic learners. And we've got a lot of information, and you certainly shared a lot of it with us today. So I really appreciate that. The other question I wanted to ask you, and before I do, I'm just going to share a couple of comments here. Sarah Ann gave you an amazing, and I'm not going to even count the number of explanation points there, but quite a few. And Pam said, beyond brilliant. I actually yelled that beyond brilliant part. Thank you so much. So certainly people are appreciating what you shared. The other question I had for you, so as you kind of continued your journey into the classroom and now are supporting kids who are already probably knee-deep in compliance-based approaches, and yet you come in and you have a different approach. In fact, I know from conversations I've had with you, you've stood up to systems that concern you, that wanted to focus on rewards, and you wanted to do things differently. How did kids respond as you began to do something differently? Because I'm sure at first it felt a little foreign, right? Like, hey, where's my prize, or where's my this or that? So how did the children you support initially respond as you began to do things differently, and how do you see them respond now?
Yeah, so I'm almost forced, I feel like sometimes at first, to teach them that I'm against those systems. And commonly, I have kids who like they come in, and there was a sub in my room before I started teaching, because I till October, and she's an incredible woman, but Some of them, we had two very different ways of teaching, especially when it came to the PBIS stuff. And some of my kids were suspicious at first. They look at me kind of like, where's the catch? Because a lot of these kids have spent years in systems where every interaction is transactional. If you're good, you get a prize. And if you're not, you don't get a prize, right?
Your self-worth becomes tied to meeting somebody's expectations.
So when I wasn't handing out rewards every 5 minutes, some students were genuinely confused. And I do have a prize box, but it's more of a like welcome to my class box. So before we even start learning, before I've even said hello, they grab something out of a box, and I don't take it away. And I've had kids like lose it, like after I've already given them something, right? And it's kind of just like because I pull them out for 45 minutes, so it's like a thank you for being here more than anything. And if they're absent, they actually get that item the next day. So they get to make up for the fact that they didn't get one yesterday, or the day before or whatever. And I remember I have a lot of students who are like, wait, you're not going to take this from me? Like, I don't have to give it back to you. Like, I've melted down and you're not going to take it away. And sometimes it's a snack or, you know, whatever, but it's just because like there's no root behind it. And right now I'm subbing summer school. And it's interesting because I brought food for all the kids just because, you know, it's summer, it's hot outside. Here's some popsicles, right? Like, and I had kids who were like, why are you giving this to us? What did we do to earn this? Like immediately. And it was like, I don't know. Like, I just felt like it. It's summer and it's hot outside. Like, I wanted a popsicle. So I thought all 20 of you did too. You know? Right. And so, I always get the questions from my kids. What do we get if we finish? How many points is this worth? How many prizes do I get if I do this?
And that carries over into homes. You know, I mean, you know, I know that. I know it well. And, you know, oh, well, where's my prize? Do I get a prize? You know, everything becomes transactional. And you know, I mean, you've hit on it. You know, the decrease in intrinsic motivation, the decrease in generosity. You know, all these things have a big impact.
Yeah.
So we have reached our time here, and I'm sure you and I could continue on for probably another hour easily. There was a great comment here from Andy who says, and this is so meaningful. I'm always baffled how adults using manipulative systems can feel okay accusing kids of being manipulative. Right. Wow, let that sink in for a minute. Andy, that sounds like another article there, by the way.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, it really does say a lot. So as we wrap up today, I mean, I want to thank you, of course, for being here and sharing. You're doing a lot of amazing work out there, and you're of course doing amazing work in the classroom, working directly with kids. But you're also out sharing your thoughts, your ideas, you know, in various forms, whether it be books or conferences. And in fact, you and I get to actually meet in person at a conference here in about a week and a half, which is exciting. You know, we've known each other for quite some time, but it'll be exciting to get to see you in person and get a quick picture and all that good stuff. But I want to give you an opportunity, one, to share any final thoughts that you have as we wrap up, and two, if there's anything else you want to share or promote and tell people about that you're doing, feel free to do that as well. So any final thoughts you have or anything you want to share as we wrap up here today?
Yeah, I'm speaking at the Creating Trauma-Informed Schools conference that he brought up. I also have a virtual conference that is accessible to anyone. I'm speaking at June 22nd, so if anyone's interested in that, feel free to reach out. It's the MTSS of the nervous system, so it's very different than the presentation today. And then I'm also going to be selling my books at a conference up in Dallas, so if anyone's interested in that as well, then feel free to reach out.
Great, fantastic. Well, I want to thank you again for being here, and look forward to seeing you soon. I want to thank everybody in the audience that was with us today. I know we had quite a few people on here live, and again, encourage you, if you found this valuable, if you found it useful, share these conversations. We have them up on YouTube, and they're there forever. But by sharing these with friends, with colleagues, with other families, with other self-advocates, whoever it might be, by sharing these things, we amplify it. We get more people thinking in a different way, and that has never been needed more than it is today. So I want to thank you for being here as our audience today. And again, thank Becca for the fantastic presentation. And we will see you all again. I think we might even have another presentation coming up next week. We've had a lot of special events that have been popping up recently. In fact, we had a short one yesterday to talk about the upcoming Creating Trauma-Sensitive Schools conference. And Alex just left a comment there for you as well. So at any rate, we will see you all again. Becca, if you will stick around, we're going to say goodbye to everybody else, and I will thank you again behind the scenes. So thank you, everybody. We'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.